July of 1987, 800 Americans of African descent arrived in Egypt for a two-week tour of the Nile Valley. This was the largest such group thus far to ever visit Africa, and it made the headlines in Egypt. Yet, it was more than a tourist event. While seeing the remnants of the ancient Nile civilization, the group would hear lectures giving a rare perspective about a culture that most history had misrepresented. The lectures would come from an accompanying group of African-American historians, who were also there for their organization's conference that the tour group sat in on. This reporter was part of this two-week experience, and this is the first of our three-part special report that we call Return to the Nile Valley. Ben and Professor John Henry Clark. Most in the tour group had come as a result of a lecture they had heard or a book they had read by either of these two men. Many of the historians who were here had also had their attention on Africa focused by Drs. Ben and Clark.
In '68, when I got here, I became aware of Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben. I'd heard of both of them before, but I met them in early '69, I believe, and they had a tremendous impact on me, but I didn't get a chance to interact with them on a regular basis, and it was not until '75 when I met Diop that I was able to go day after day after day and get reprimanded and lectured to and so forth and so on. But no, Ben and John were right there from the beginning.
Dr. Ben, along with Dr. Clark and others, have been to the mountaintop. They looked over to the other side. And then they've been yelling and screaming to those of us down in the valley to come up to the mountaintop and see for yourself. Many of us have been able to work our way up and stand at their sides and see for ourselves. But too many of us are in the valley, lost, and we cannot see what is on the other side. Alone, they have changed the whole of history. They've destroyed the big lie. They've created a new concept of African self, a new concept of African consciousness.
History books have not always clearly depicted the Egyptian civilization as being explicitly African. In addition, the U.S. movie industry has depicted the people of ancient Egypt explicitly as white.
You will have to speak for yourself, physician.
Not for myself, sire, but for one whose memory you've tried to wipe out, whose very name you've sought to destroy, for Akhenaten.
Do you flaunt your treason in my face? That name is forbidden.
For decades, Professor Ben-Jochannan has been offering loudly another perspective of ancient Egyptian history. In fact, during the last 10-year period, Dr. Ben appeared on Like It Is several times, presenting his perspective on ancient Egypt.
My priority is the Africans along the Nile. And the reason for that is, if we deal with the Africans along the Nile, we will be dealing with those people who originally produced the foundation for what is today Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Greek philosophy, among other things. What I am saying, were it not for the Africans along the Nile, there would be no God Jehovah, no God Jesus, no God Allah, and no such thing as Greek philosophy. For example, to say that Moses, who was born in Africa, a place called Goshen in Egypt, got the first set of moral laws from a God which would be not before, at best, 1346 when Moses was born, and it couldn't be then, those so-called 10 Commandments, that those 10 Commandments plus 32 more were already in African writings, such as the Book of the Dead, the Osirian Drama, that the concept of monotheism didn't come from Moses, as taught in the synagogue and the mosque and the church, but in fact, it preceded Moses for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and at least taught by a man called Amenhotep IV or Akhenaten in terms of the god Atum. The concept of a virgin birth, that of Mary becoming pregnant by an immaculate conception, giving birth to her son, Horus, by this virgin birth, 4,100 years before the Mary-Joseph story, Jesus story, the Africans had already taught about this in the person of Isis becoming pregnant by an immaculate conception and giving birth to her virgin son, Horus.
And so it was a personal triumph for Dr. Ben to have 800 of his brothers and sisters, young and old, come all the way from the United States to the Nile to see for themselves what he'd been saying for so long.
Yes, it's a fulfillment of a dream that started in 1939. I guess it started early in conceptualization, but the first time I came here was in 1939 when the British were in control. The old cataract you see up there was the kind of a citadel of British colonial power.
Were you able to stay at the Cataract Hotel?
No.
You couldn't stay there?
I couldn't walk in the gate. I didn't stay there. I stood in knapsack. I lie down and in the brushes in knapsack. And at that time, you still had cobras and crocodile-infested areas. I couldn't, nothing looking like me could have stayed in the cataract. I don't care who you are. You could have been the richest man in Nubia. You couldn't stay in the cataract. It was strictly for whites only. Very few Arabs could stay in the cataract. Don't care how white he was. And don't care how rich he was. This was British aristocracy.
What drove you to come over here back then?
Well, my father primarily, and my father I had been rejected in school by a woman named Miss Armstrong. A teacher come from Texas and Puerto Rico told me in the classroom that my people didn't have anything to worry about other than Tarzan and Jane. And I went back and told my father. My father took his key, which he had carried around for neck for years. I didn't know. I knew he had a key around the neck, but I didn't know what it was for. And he took that key and opened a little closet he had. I could see the book from the outside in the glass showcase. But when he gave me the key and told me, now, you read those books, and you read the references stated in those books and all the bibliography in those books, and use the bibliography, each one, and whatever they give, read that. And when you finish, come back and tell me who don't have a history. And of course, he was saying to me, you will never stop reading, you'll never stop finding about your history. And then when I went to the history, I found instead of myself not having an antiquitous history, it was the same person who had been teaching, Mrs. Armstrong. She didn't have a history before the Greeks. Her history started with the Greeks. Mine came here and beyond, up the Nile.
This identifying of Egypt as being outside of Africa was complicated by the European discovery of Egypt and their inability to attribute this grandeur, this civilization, to an African people. So the Western academic community ignored some of the great works on Africa written by whites in order to propagate the concept that Egypt was part of Europe or an extension of Asia. And what they failed to do is to distinguish between the invaders of Egypt and the indigenous people of Egypt. Egypt was probably more invaded than any country in the history of the world. And it is now people in the main by descendants of invaders. And what we need to do is to look at Africa in general. Everybody in Africa today who cannot be classified as an African is either an invader or a descendant of an invader. Many times these invaders are interpreting African history and interpreting African nations, the nations that their descendants moved in and tried to destroy.
Egypt is the home of the first functioning civilization that ultimately laid the basis for world civilization. And that civilization was built by African people. And it was built before the first European wore a shoe or lived in a house that had a window. Ben has been good in sharpening my perception of Egypt and the Nile Valley
because as a teacher of African history, I try to be a generalist. Now, if I explain this in medical terms, you'd understand. Ben is a specialist on Egypt. We love each other as brothers, and we support each other, and every time one of us are in need, we come to each other's rescue. We have certain standard arguments that we argue about incessantly because we enjoy the argument.
What is that?
I think about the dynasties of Egypt. I think the 18th dynasty was the greatest dynasty ever to sit on any throne at any time in the history of the world. Ben holds out for the 19th in the dynasty of the Ramesses, and I hold out for the dynasty of the Tutmosis. And so it goes on until then when we exhaust ourselves with that argument, we start arguing about a simple thing like, I'm going to take you for dinner, and who's going to pay for the dinner?
This canopy of understanding, as expressed by Doctors Ben and Clark, served as the basic theme of the journey. And so the pilgrimage got underway. First stop in Egypt was Cairo. You haven't seen dense population till you've been to Cairo. The crush of humanity and vehicular traffic is overwhelming. As we wound through the streets of this age-old city, we were given an orientation by Professor Leonard Jeffries.
You know, we've got to be able to look at these things in an African consciousness, but that means you've got to rid yourself of the European mind that we have, that we've developed through our education process. When we go south, it'll be easy to do it, because we'll be out of this monstrosity. We'll be in a much slower environment. We'll be with people who will embrace us as Nubian brothers and sisters. You see some of the hotel complexes. There's the Ramses Hilton way down, all the way at the end. We stayed there a couple of years ago when it was just being completed. The Nile Hilton is near there. An extraordinary city. Egypt is one of the most rapidly growing nations. In other words, the population rate is enormous.
Dr. Jeffries went to meet Dr. Ben, who was waiting at a hotel that had rolled out the red carpet for him, as well as the entourage from the United States. And then Dr. Ben, Dr. Jeffries, and Dr. Asa Hilliard, an historian, went to the outskirts of Cairo for a look at the pyramids of Giza and the nearby Sphinx.
The pyramids were built, first of all, as a resting place for the pharaoh. But more particularly, it was a place in which the pharaoh, and first they buried the pharaoh deep into the earth. The original belief that the deity could be reached first deep into the crust of the earth, and that theory. And so they sunk a shaft approximately 92 feet down, and there was where the body was placed. That's at Saqqara. By the time they came here, because of the grave robbers and whatnot, they felt if they put the body higher, then they would be closer to God Ra being in the sun. And secondly, it was used as an observatory for the astrophysical calculations and so forth, particularly when they reached the stage where they were able to establish calendar. Those were the two basic reasons, or the three basic reasons, in which pyramids were built.
Whomever claims the establishment of the pyramids claims first place in terms of, and primacy in terms of development of human civilization, because the pyramids symbolize so much. It was not just the mortuary temple or the resting place of the pharaohs. It symbolizes expertise in architecture, expertise in technology, expertise in theology and philosophy, so that the pyramids symbolize so much in terms of what was the beginning of an enormous civilizing process that affected not only Africa, but Asia and Europe. So the claiming of the pyramids and acknowledging who built them becomes very important.
There's 72 pyramids in Egypt. The first one was the 3rd dynasty. The last ones were built in the 13th dynasty. Abraham was born in the
13th dynasty in a place called Ur in Chaldea, and came here during the same time when a conquering people called the Hyksos came in.
It was not necessary to have slave labor to build the pyramid, because when the Nile overflowed and there was an inundation, there were thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people that had to wait months before the Nile receded that were not doing anything. And so to put them to collective building and work is in the African tradition, because the African value system is communal, cooperative, and collective.
They build. It's just no more than people in the United States build. You ask people to build for a church or a synagogue or something like that, and they believe in those kind. They willingly give. They willingly build. But instead of just giving money, these people put their all in the inundation period in building these monuments to the deity.
There are some young brothers and sisters in the States who say, look, this is all well and good if you're into history, but I'm into law. I'm into medicine. I want to be a computer analyst. Why do I need to get my head into the pyramids and this kind of stuff? What is it? What relevance does it have?
I think he's into history if he's into those fields. That's right. He's unavoidably practicing history. Every mathematician who starts to work and writes down something that he calls the Pythagorean theorem, which was produced before Pythagoras was born, and not by Pythagoras, you know, even though he may think he's practicing mathematics, he's passing on images of history that affect the images of the practitioners. And that is true of almost every field, whether if it's a medical doctor who raised his hand and took the oath of Hippocrates, when we aren't even sure there was a Hippocrates, when it was really this gentleman Imhotep who designed the step pyramid, who is the true father of medicine. His name was termed Aesculapius, so your physicians then all raise their hand and practice history when they say, I swear by Apollo the physician and Aesculapius. And the very fact that many of them can raise their hand and take an oath to a person that they don't even know suggests that maybe they ought to practice both their profession and history at the same time.
And the beautiful thing about that question of the so-called Hippocratic oath, which many could say is the hypocrisy of understanding the domination of European culture, is that a living African genius, the vizier to the pharaoh Zoser Imhotep, became translated by the Greeks into a god, the god of medicine and healing arts. So the Greeks worshiped the Africans.
And that engineering came from here. Triangulation and everything, mathematics, pi, and all that came from here. The first numbers, 1 to 8, came from here. When we go to the temple at the double temple at Komombo, I will show you the engineering, the numbers, it's a system where it came from. So that pharmacology, there's nothing you could practice. Computer science, you can have computer without mathematics.
Give me a brief history lesson here. Which is the oldest of the 3 pyramids? There are 3 small ones in the foreground, and there are 2 small ones to the right. Just give us an idea of how and when they were built.
The first one, you see the one with the cap on?
Right.
The white cap. All of them had that marble cap. The first one, which is the tallest, even though it doesn't look so, this one in the middle seems to be tall. It's just smaller, but built on higher ground. The first one is of Khufu. They're all the 4th dynasty. Khufu...
The one nearest us.
No, the farthest one from us.
The tallest one?
That's the tallest. It's actually the tallest, and it is the oldest. That's built by the father of these 3 men. The one, Khufu. His son...
Which one is Khufu?
The farthest from us. The one...
With the top off.
The one with the marble top on, the casing on, is the second. That's by Khafra, the son of the one farthest from us. And this little one here, the 3rd in height, is Menkaura, the son of the second one and the grandson of the first one. Now, the Greeks call the first one, Khufu, Cheops. Herodotus, when he came in, that's way later, in 450, that will bring us into the Persian period, because the Greeks took over in 332. So the Persians were ruling for 525. So that means Herodotus was here during the time of the Persian rule. The second one is Khafra, the son.
Now what about these little ones in the foreground?
Of the queens. the queens and a few other dignitaries, but mostly queens and prime ministers are the best. But the prime ministers, for the most part, and other officers are buried into what is called mastabas. We will show you. A mastaba is nothing but a rectangular shaped thing. Originally, the kings were buried in them, but then they start to go towards the pyramids.
All right. There's one other. You see, were you going to say something about the boat?
The boat house.
That's very important.
Yeah.
What is the boat?
Well, you can see the
museum.
house near the pyramid in the farthest distance out there.
Smooth area there.
Smooth area right at the base. That is actually a housing for a boat that is 140 feet long. That is, it's called Khufu's boat. It was buried in a pit.
A wooden boat, really?
A wooden boat.
A royal barge.
A royal barge.
And
And it's 140 feet long. Now, by comparison, you have Captain Cook's ship, the Endeavor, that he was sailing on was 106 feet long. So you have a 140-foot boat in that, reconstructed from the lumber and that was buried, it was disassembled and buried in this boat pit, and it's now been reconstructed so you can see what it looked like.
All right. In other words, they used to take this boat, disassemble it, put it down, and then when they need, reassemble it. Not a piece missing. It run from 190 feet long to 4 inches long.
Now, this valley here is barren. There's nothing growing here. Was it like that when the pyramids were built?
Yes, sir. Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, except for the stones that they dug out and the wind that blows this sand back and forth, it is as it was.
All right, now, the Nile is not far from here. In the haze in the background is the city of Cairo, right?
Yes, a good way from here. A few miles.
Cairo, all right.
Yeah.
And the Nile is how far from here?
Figure 5-10 miles.
All right.
It varies.
Where is the quarry that they got these stones to build the pyramid?
2 places. When you came from the airport,
right,
you came up an area and you saw a big fort and a mosque.
Yes.
Citadel. Muhammad Ali Mosque and the Citadel. They came from the quarries right in front of that, where the stones came from here. You say, why? The Nile flood. They could easily bring them with the boat and then pull them up the ramp.
I see.
There's no mystery about it.
You said there were 2 places.
Well, the next place, they got some of the stones, especially for the casing, was right here where they cut out the Sphinx.
I'm just trying, and I guess the average person is going to look at this desolate area and say, why in the name of heaven would you start something that enormous out here?
But notice one thing, though. This is the west, and everything is symbolical in it. This is the west bank.
Yes.
This is where you go when you die. The sun sets in the west. So
that's
symbolically,
you go.
This is the barren place where you make your final resting place. But you're you will rise again, and when you rise again, when you die, you're Osiris, but when you rise again, you will be Horus.
That's
just
right.
like the sun rises again, but it rises in the east.
That's right.
So most of your living quarters, your temples, were built on the east side of the river. This is the cemetery. We are standing in a cemetery right now.
Necropolis.
So the cemetery, a necropolis is right over here on this side.
Necro is in death.
Yes. Only the dead, except one exception, and the exception wasn't built. It was in Saqqara, where the Nile at once changed its direction, and so the people had to move from Memnefa to the high side, and it's the only place where the necropolis and the living quarters merged.
Not far from the Great Pyramids of Giza is a place called Saqqara, dominated by the Grand Temple of Djoser, that's spelled D-J-O-S-E-R, and the Step Pyramid designed by the African multi-genius Imhotep.
Well, it's built on, if you'll notice, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mastabas that you can see. And this is the burial pattern in pre-dynastic time. Used to dig a hole in the ground and bury the body and then cover it with a slab of rocks called in the Arabic, mastaba, which means simply a flat bench, usually rectangular in shape. And this pyramid is indeed rectangular in shape. But you get the pyramid effect by stacking mastabas on top of each other. But you still have the same function. Just as this pyramid has a burial chamber and there were 2 sarcophagi inside the burial chamber. There were other pieces of pottery, very little writing at all, inside the pyramid. This is the oldest pyramid in the world. It's the oldest stone structure in the world. And this whole complex then represents a type of architecture in stone that is unlike anything that had ever been seen anywhere else in the world. These were the native African people who built this, because you remember that we're in the first 12 dynasties still. In fact, this is in the 3rd dynasty, so this is really in the Old Kingdom, which would be the oldest kingdom in the world. And at that time this is pre-heroic Greece. You know, for example, the heroic age in Greece is somewhere around 2000 BC. And so this civilization will function for another 750 years before there will be anything resembling a Greek, even in mythology. And so this places us well at the forefront of civilization. They were native people, they were black African people who did this work. All the carvings, paintings, and everything will verify that.
The Christians, early Christians, and the early Muslims dug the face out, actually went with chisels. The ultimate to this was the destruction, to destroy the face of the symbol of the god Hamakis, which they call the Sphinx of Giza, which Napoleon ordered his lieutenant to blow away the face. And that's the damage to it. It is even documented by one of his men that was in Count Vivian Dinant. Your 21 gun salutes come from that, with 21 guns it took to shoot the face partially off.
Baron Dinant, who was with Napoleon, he and Volney said that that's what happened.
Soon after that, it was off for southern Egypt. It was only a 1-hour flight from Cairo to the city of Aswan, populated by Africans of a darker hue called Nubians. We arrived in Aswan just as darkness enveloped this city. It would be from here that we would go by bus the next day to see Ramesses II's temple and Abu Simbel. Also, Aswan would be where the historians' conference, ASCAC, which stands for the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, would hold their conference. The entourage would all but fill 3 major hotels along the Nile in Aswan, including the old Cataract Hotel, the hotel that once denied Dr. Ben a room and now found itself, ironically, making a lot of money from the very group that Dr. Ben had brought. A fleet of buses headed further south for Abu Simbel. The 3.5-hour journey crossed desert country with temperatures that would reach 130 degrees that day. When they all returned to Aswan that night, Dr. Ben would lecture them about what they had seen. And on the way out to Abu Simbel, each bus had a lecturer who would prepare the group for what they were about to see.
African culture and society was built around a moral and ethical code, and every strand of conduct of the great and every strand of conduct of the most humble had to fit that code, and it's symbolized by the concept of Ma'at, M-A-A-T, that there is justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity in the universe, and we all should abide by that. And that was the overriding factor in this culture, and that became part of the history of later peoples. The Greeks took a part of the system, it became Greek philosophy. The ancient Hebrews took a part of the system, it became Judaism. The ancient Christians took a part of the system, it became Christianity. But the people who had the whole system were the Africans of the Nile, and they used it to sustain a cultural civilization for 5,000 to 10,000 years. And that's the greatness of what we're about to see. It's not in the stone monuments, but it's in the ethical and moral system, the values, the concepts that these things represent.
But no lecture could prepare one for the impact of coming down around the face of that huge edifice at Abu Simbel and seeing the awesome monuments of the African Egyptian king and his queen, Ramesses II and Nefertari.
I think this is a statement of African people around the world. And we're coming back to reclaim our land, and we know the great monuments and temples and pyramids our ancestors built. and we're proud of it.
I don't think I'll ever be the same. Seeing so many things come to life that we've been studying about is just unreal. I'm impressed. We were bad. We were bad, obviously, and to be around 800 other beautiful people, I am excited. I'm energized.
Statues represent what you may call a contribution to spirituality. Ramses II was trying to reinforce his image as a spiritual leader throughout what he considered Kemet. By that time, the boundaries of Kemet had expanded as far south as perhaps Napata, and he was trying to demonstrate to the whole country the grandeur of African spirituality, and so he built these great temples to represent his dedication and commitment to that. But he came from a family that originated in the Delta. They were black people, they were African people. The people of ancient Kemet were African people. There was no difference ethnically between the Nubians and the people that were called historically the ancient Egyptians. They were the same race, they had the same culture, and they had the same general ethnic orientation. And you can tell by the features of the queen and the features of Ramses himself, they both had flat noses, thick lips, that they were African people like we are.
These represent the creative genius of African people at the beginning of time, okay? This is a great statement to the world of human possibility. These are monuments to our history, and it shows, as Garvey said, what humans have done, humans can do.
Ramses II was extraordinary because his rule was one of the longest in the history of the world, and his building projects have lasted for eternity. These monuments are important because they're looking south into Nubia, from whence the culture came, the source, the roots of Kemetic civilization. And it's very important for us to appreciate that this is sacred ground.
Ramesses II was the greatest of all the kings that bore that name because he consolidated the gains of the 17th and the 18th dynasty. And in the conflict with the South, what is now Sudan, it was settled with a political marriage between Ramesses II and the Nubian woman, Nefertari. And this political settlement marriage became a great love affair. It was not a great love affair. And her temple reflects the respect that not only he had for her, but carrying out the agreement to treat her with great equality. Now, where we are geographically is close to the Sudan. And now, after Ramesses, this is the 19th dynasty, the great pharaohs of the Lower Nile had their day in the sun. Egypt's great light began to wane. The power in Africa reverted to her parents, Egypt's parents, the Ethiopians. Then they brought into being a great queen known sometime as Belkis, known as Makeda, but better known as the Queen of Sheba.
These temples were built 13 centuries before Christ was born, out of sandstone along what was once the original embankment of the Nile River. But in 1963, 5 nations assigned their best engineers to move these temples to higher ground to avoid them being engulfed by the rising waters from the newly constructed Aswan Dam. The monuments could not be moved intact, so they were painstakingly cut into smaller blocks and reassembled at this present location. The rescue effort cost a then estimated $36 million and was hailed as an engineering miracle, and rightly so. But what then does one say of those who originally created all of this, some 3,287 years ago? After the trip to Abu Simbel, Dr. Ben delivered evening lectures at 2 of the 3 hotels where the group members were staying.
First, when you went to Abu Simbel, you saw this Colossus temple, 2 of them, that were chopped out, hewn out of a mountain. I wish you had the opportunity to see them before 1961. when they were cut up into pieces because of the new dam, and it will give you opportunity to see it in the true manner, not just as it stands today, even though as impressive as it is. But the first thing is that we have been taught that the only time a man, a ruler, ever built a major temple for his wife was the Taj Mahal. But no one told us that this was here for thousands of years before there was a Taj Mahal, and that an African man had built it for an African woman. An African man from Nubia by the name of Ramses II, the son of Satai I, built this temple for the most beautiful queen, Nefertari. The word Nefertari means most beautiful, and the word Nefertiti means the beautiful. Now, Ramses ruled from 1298 to about 1232, before the Common Era. He built this temple as a gift to his young wife because there was some altercation between him and her father to the south in Nubia. But you must remember, Nubia at various times extended all the way north to a place called Asyut. It is north of Luxor. What you see today as Nubia is an infinitesimal part of what it originally was. So that temple down there represents the reunification of ties, of bonds between ancient Nubia and ancient Egypt. When you look at the first temple, the temple of Nefertari, you notice that the main deity there is the goddess Het-Heru, Hathor. And you notice that Hathor, when shown as a woman, has the ears of a cow. When you get to the Valley of the Kings and Deir el-Bari, you're going to see the whole cow representing Hathor. What else you would notice as you went there, at all four sides of each column, you saw Goddess Hathor. Next thing you should have observed is the manner in which this temple has been reconstructed. And I wouldn't go into the modern aspect of the temple. But you notice that in these temples, what is being told is the life of the pharaoh or life of the queen. The temples of worship, the main purpose is to celebrate the god or the deity of the temple, as well as to tell the life of the individual. When you move over to the temple of Ramses II himself, you notice the four major figures in the front. They're each about 30 foot tall in the sitting position. But in the middle of the four, two on each side of the doorway, above you see the statue of the figure of God Horakti. Horakkhty. Ra Horakti. Horus in the form of Ra. And above that, there are some monkeys, the baboons, the sacred monkeys, the sacred baboons, each representing a time or the day. And these baboons, being the sacred baboons, you notice 13 of them, symbolic of the extra day and year which they used to have in the ancient calendar of Egypt. It was 13 months to the year, 12 months of 30 days, and 1 month of 5 days. But when you start to go into the temple, on each side of the temple tells us something specific about the kind of teaching that we receive. That is, in the entrance to the temple, where you have the buttress, you notice on one side, the captives, the people who are captured and chained, on one side they have long features. And the upper side, they have a feather in their hair. The funny thing is, in your school book, the ones on the right side as you're going in is called Semitic captives of war belonging to Ramesses II. On the opposite side, the only thing has changed is the features. They look more like you. But the textbook says, captured slaves of Pharaoh Ramesses. But then if you don't look at the features of Ramesses himself and the one they call the captured slaves and ask, what's the difference? And why one is a slave under the same condition as the other one who is a captured what? Enemy, a captured. All right. You have to do some thinking from then on. When Ramesses died in 1232, Jesus is supposed to have been 1232 years after the death of Ramesses. We could go along there and we notice around the wall the many wars of Ramesses, recording of even the Battle of Kadesh. Ramesses recorded every altercation he was in. Why then, when his army is to be drowned by the Red Sea, the water parts away, leaving a tremendous gorge, that his soldiers, men prepared for war, all drowned by this gorge, but the Hebrew children, men and women from age whatever to age whatever, pregnant women, old people, crippled people, all of the Hebrews went down the gorge, down the side, walked up the side of a wall, and crossed over, and not a single one got killed. I just finished reading a paper from the Washington Post in April, showing what this noted world scholar now they start the question and said there was no such thing as the Exodus. It was in fact just a folklore.
Do we need this kind of backbone history for all the way back there? We living in 1987. Well, what do you need a mother for? You living now? Get rid of it, you dumb born. No. You see, you got to put the thing, that's what I've been telling you. You can't just read it. You got to, you know what they say, and analyze it with what you're doing and what your belief system is, and know how you got robbed. That's why you're here. I didn't bring you here just to give you a long airline trip. You know, and diarrhea. Oh, no, you know the Bible. You know every T and every dot is correct. But you don't know where you stand in it, because when you see the pictures, if I had to go to heaven based upon those pictures, I'd be scared like hell, because I could say, there ain't nothing but crack up here. I won't want to go on those pictures. But when you understand that it's a black woman that the Bible is speaking about, that Abraham is going to deny worshiping Goddess Hathor, yourself, then you realize that here too is an attempt to put down the African woman. But we're glad he didn't worship the old. He gave up the cow, and then they go worship Jehovah. He gave up you, the black woman. But you don't know. I don't blame you. You don't know. You just come here and you're going to see it. As a matter of fact, go down and see it. You're going to see right down, right across it, a picture of Goddess Hathor. Right there. And now, we're going to see not only that, but on the wall, we're going to see at that temple the story of Hatshepsut going
to the land of Pu-Anit, which the Jews are going to later in their Nancy story call Punt. It will be the story of when the world went to an end because a fellow named Noah is going to take his little family, put them in a boat, 90 cubits. A cubit is 3 feet, 90 times 3. If my math isn't bad, 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 9 is 27. 270 feet long. Do you know, this is about 100 feet, 270, but twice this building plus 3/4. Now let's say how big that boat is. And they're going to put 2 of everything.
The sense of being a part of something of historic importance was building. By now, the excitement level was high in Aswan. We all had a sense of being a part of something of historic importance taking place in a setting of great historic importance. The emotional content of it all was perhaps best embodied in what this young man revealed to me.
What's your name?
Omar Nobles.
Omar. How old are you?
17.
17? Where are you in school?
I just graduated from Columbus High School in Oakland, California.
Oh, really? What are you doing out here?
This was a graduation present for my parents.
A graduation? That's kind of unusual, isn't it?
Well, no. My parents believe in the pass on the legacy to the family, I guess. So basically, they came back to Kemet about maybe 10 years ago and felt that this was something that they had to pass on to me and to my 3 sisters. So basically, as each of us graduate, we will be given a portfolio with a message from my parents.
A portfolio? Is this it here?
Yes.
The pages are blank.
It's a diary for me to journalize.
Uh-huh. What was your reaction when your father gave you this ticket?
I was shocked and nervous and worried, and I mean, all these emotions hit me at one time. It was kind of stunning.
Apprehensive too? Were you somewhat resistant?
No, I've seen pictures and slides and heard about Dr. Ben and his works in ancient Egyptian studies. So basically, that part excited me because I was kind of curious into meeting this man for myself.
There's a saying that youngsters know it all. They got it all figured out. This thing called life. Were you part of that cadre?
In some ways. In terms of, parental advice, in terms of hourly going out and, oh, Mom, I should be home by such and such. Well, that's kind of late. Oh, Mom, I can handle myself in the streets. I'm not worried about these people. But you always have to be a little bit comprehensive anyway.
Your father wrote something on the end page here, the inside of the cover. Did you read that?
It says, Dear Omar, your mother and I thought that this trip to Kemet would be the best graduation present we could give you. We wanted to give you the gift of visiting in person, seeing with your own eyes, and knowing for yourself the greatness that belongs to you and our people. The significance of your graduation is that it marks the time that you personally start to make your own mark in history. There is nothing that you can't do or become as long as you believe in yourself, your family, your race, and your God. Look at what we, black people, did. Know what we can do and decide what you will become. You belong to greatness. African blessings and love. Your parents, Wade and Vera Nobles, Ptah Hotep, 6/29/87.
What does that mean to you?
That my parents could probably the best parents ever in the world. My father's, I don't know, it's like he sees all these things ahead of me that I really didn't pay much attention to. And he knows more about my greatness than I did for myself. And after being in the black land, I was starting to see for myself that it's about time I get on the road and do for myself.
Do you think there are any limits to what you can do or be?
After seeing the pyramids and Ramses II, there is no limit to anything.
Ahead of us was the ASCAC conference, where some of the leading American historians of African descent would lecture. And there were those awesome temples and monuments waiting to reveal to us their ancient bond with each of us, as you will see in the next hour in our three-part series called Return to the Nile Valley. In this, the second in our three-part series called Return to the Nile Valley, we pick up with our group of 800 Americans of African descent who are touring the Nile Valley in Egypt. They've already seen the pyramids in Cairo and are now in Aswan in southern Egypt, where they have toured the awesome temples of Ramesses II and Nefertari. They are now gathering to witness a conference in Aswan held by an organization of historians of African descent called ASCAT, which stands for the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. In this hour, you'll see what developed in that conference and also see more of the continuing tour of monuments and temples after the conference. All that after this.
Egypt is a country of about 45 or more million people. Those people live in about 4 to 5% of all the land. The Nile, along the Nile, that's the fertile land. Egyptian education is free, completely free. Education is free to and including college. You don't study what you want. You study what you prove you're competent of doing, according to your record. Egypt is a partly socialist, capitalist, mixed economy. You can't starve in Egypt, it's impossible. Every man, woman, and child in Egypt is guaranteed bread, coffee or tea, and sugar. You may not be living good, but you can't starve. All housing is controlled by rental. You cannot raise the rent without approval of the government, even the houses for the rich. Housing is hard. You could see it everywhere to get because of the population increase. There are thousands of young people waiting to be married, and because of housing, they have to wait. Let me explain something. People don't mess with their virgin daughters. They are virgins at the 1,000 living in a mother and father home, 45, 50, 60, 70 years old. It is the common way of life here. A woman 40 years, let's say, unmarried, virgin, has a job, maybe supporting the family, cannot go out without her mother's permission. She comes home from her work. If she wants to go down the street, she has to ask her mother. She can't go and open her own private apartment and live there and a boyfriend visiting. No. When she gets her first marriage, she is expected to be a virgin and must submit the proof to her mother that night. She gets a little piece of cloth to put under her, and she must show the blood stain by morning. About 99.9% of all first marriages for women in Egypt are virgins. You violate the rule and you are a trap. So it's serious business, gentlemen. Please take precaution in terms of addressing women. You will see women wearing black. Primarily, they are women from the country or used to be living in the country and moved to the city. It shows that they are married or they are widowed. Mostly if they're wearing black lace that you could see through to the design underneath, they are engaged. If they're not wearing black of any sort, unless they're Christians or so forth and have a ring, they are single. That doesn't give you the right to approach them. You approach an Egyptian girl or a Nubian girl by asking a friend to introduce you to her parents. Men don't ask her or approach her directly. Now you're talking about Cairo, it's a different thing. Cairo people do anything. Like New York, Sin City. I thought that you needed to know that because you're going to be moving around.
And the ASCAC conference was held in Aswan in the Nubian Conference Center, a facility donated to ASCAC by the people of this city. All 800 members of the touring group attended to hear a series of lectures by some of the preeminent African scholars of African history, all of whom have formed this organization.
Once I started studying that language and realized it was more than just simply grammar that I had to get the whole spirit of the civilization out of that language, and started doing that, then I just went through a series of transformations. Now, then I understood the dream that Ben had. That is the dream that we had to really make this Nile Valley flourish again. Then I understood the dream that going back to the 19th century, Martin Delaney had about the ancient Nile Valley civilization and so forth and so on. And so I started dreaming that dream, on my own in a certain way, and saying that, it would be great if we could really pull an association of all of the African scholars and all of the African people who can be led to believe this way into an association cutting across disciplines and so forth and so on, and really move in that direction.
Professors John Henry Clark and Yosef ben-Jochannan are elders in ASCAC.
Brothers and sisters, we have come to this sacred place, this sacred land, made sacred by the history that unfolds here with the help of our ancestors. We must remember that here on the Nile Valley, in both the upper and the lower part of this valley, we produced a great civilization that was a composite civilization, a civilization that was a mixture of many African civilizations, and not just the civilization of the Lower Nile alone. We produced that civilization in full before the first invader, before the first European war eschewed, lived in a house that had a window. And foreigners gave nothing to it but to bring it down. While this was the first and the best known of the great river civilizations of Africa, it was not the only river civilization of Africa. It is the best known. It is the best known because it inherited the best talent in the African world as technicians and as builders. We must remember that we are not here for a vacation. We are here to reaffirm a sacred commitment, not only to reclaim Africa physically, but to reclaim it culturally, because if you don't reclaim it culturally and politically, you have not reclaimed it at all. With this said, I am pleased to announce with this 4th annual conference of the Society for the Study of Classical African Civilization is over.
The conferees heard a series of lectures about various aspects of African history and culture, as well as its implications. These presentations were made during a 3-day period.
It's been about 10 years since I first met Dr. Jochannan-Return and Dr. ben-Jochannan at a time which I gave my first lecture on melanin in a large public setting at the State of the Race Conference held in Los Angeles in 1977. So 10 years is indeed a circle of time to have passed, and I too would ask the great brother if I have permission to speak. It is so important to appreciate the role of the elders. They bring to us so much from the world that is hidden or beyond comprehension. And it is an honor to have them to guide us, and we always seek that kind of direction. My topic today will address the subject of the Kemetic maps of consciousness and looking at the question of Amenta in the Book of the Gates. Let me kind of begin with an overview and say that in some books, they begin with an opening saying that in the beginning there was darkness, or if you will, blackness, and from that came light. That does not mean that dark is dirty. That does not mean that dark is chaos, meaning of disarray and anarchy. Rather, it raises the question that was presented to Dr. ben-Jochannan yesterday, that darkness is the womb of life. It is a doorway through which things come from which are beyond material comprehension. And then it takes on a material presence that is more, quote, gross or coarse in manner, if you will, solid, liquid, and gaseous. But that blackness is indeed the birthplace through which light passes and it takes on material presence. We now see, and our records tell us that our African people, especially Kemetic civilization, said that in the south there were 2 great lakes. One lake from which would come the Blue Nile, and from another series of lakes which would come the White Nile. And these 2 great lakes of Tanana, which are described in the book of Coming Forth by Day, are indeed the Holy Land. It is from this holy place that the Africans, or what we call the human forms, took on presence. It is from this place that a people who then later developed the left pillar, right pillar, cortical hemisphere, we call the Twa people, or the Anu people, who would develop from an earlier group, and then in excess of 1 million years ago, move out and populate the entire planet over 1 million years ago. All of them being Africans.
We are African Americans. Now, some people have real arguments with that. I don't want to get into political arguments. I understand the claims both sides of it, so that's cool. But for the sake of argument, let's just suggest that we are African Americans. And if you don't believe that you got a lot of American in you, check you out as opposed to your brothers and sisters over here. Check out the kind of disrespect we show to each other over here. Check out the kind of imitations of Europeans that we do inadvertently. Look at the kind of reliance on certain kinds of lifestyles and certain expectations that has come about by virtue of our enslavement. Let's understand that 400 years of that experience have made us Americans. Not Euro-Americans, but African Americans. We are still Africans, but we have a tribal experience that must be taken into account because it is the slave and the American reality that's causing us all our problems. If we were just Americans or just Africans, we wouldn't have any problems. If we were only African people, then there wouldn't be the ability to appreciate African scholarship. If we were only Africans without a very thick disease of Americanism and American experience running through our lives and experiences, we wouldn't be involved in the destruction of each other as males and females and walking away from our children,
Come to the
the Nile to the black land, kissed the soil of the ancestors where they have kept homage to those who know the secrets of ancient Kemet, those who know to rise. We invite you in ASCAC to rise to your heights, the highestness of your resurrection. It's not something that will just start now, but it's a progression. It's a journey. The journey means the boats that you see in the artwork that continues to move and to travel.
Homer used to say that Kemet was the origin of Western civilization, which was simply the Greco-Roman civilization at that time. In other words, we can appeal to the Greeks themselves, who tell us in their own words and in their own writing that they borrowed extensively everything that was of value in Greco-Roman culture from Africa. So we didn't have to wait till George G.M. James wrote Stolen Legacy. The Greeks said that they had taken that legacy in the first place. Plato argued that there was a genetic relationship between Greece and Kemet in the heroic age, during the age of the Greek and the Greek heroes, and even before the age of the Roman heroes, and modeled much of his own work in the Republic and in other writings after the institutions of Kemet. So, for example, the guardians in the Republic bear a remarkable resemblance to the Kemetic priests. The academy that Plato talks about looks exactly like the temple school in the Kemetic Valley.
At the end of the second day of the conference, the audience was treated to a performance called Queens of the Nile Now, which you'll see in just a moment.
What became of the black people of Sumer? The traveler asked the old man. For ancient records show that the people of Sumer were black. What happened to them? Ah, the old man sighed. They lost their history, so they died. Come, join me in summoning our ancestors by repeating the chant with me. Come, Africa. Come, Africa. Come, Africa. Come, Africa. Come, Africa. The producer, the writer, and the designer of these magnificent costumes, my queen and wife, Miss Ingrid Thomas Anderson. Please give her a hand. Queen of the North.
Thank you very much. It has certainly been our pleasure and honor to bring Queens of the Nile here to the Nile to present to the ASCAC members. All of these sisters that you see today, this is the first time they've ever performed this. Most of them. They are queens from your region, and I think they did a wonderful job in 2 days. I said 2 days, is that all they did for 2 days?
Amidst all the cultural and intellectual excitement of the conference, a rift clearly emerged between some members of the organizations. Two of the elders, Professors Clark and Ben, were plainly at odds with at least one of the high-ranking officers, namely Dr. Maulana Karenga. Dr. Karenga is a professor at the University of California and was once known as Ron Karenga back in the 1960s.
What it says to us is that we are the fathers and mothers of human civilization, that we introduced the basic discipline of human knowledge. And we who are the fathers and mothers of human civilization have no business playing the cultured children of the world. What this does is offer a paradigm or a model of African possibility. As Garvey said, what humans have done, humans can do. So by watching this, by seeing this, by examining this, we have a model of human, i.e. African possibility.
Dr. Karenga, in your educational experience, was any of this run down to you?
No, this was never run down to me. And when I studied it in European civilization, they saw Egypt as part of Europe. Egypt is the only country in the world that ever had to justify its geography. All the other countries, if you find them a place, people assume that the place you find them in, that's where the people belong. But here in Africa, Egypt is supposed to be part of the Mediterranean or Asia. So when they taught it as European history or Asian history. We had to break with this tradition and begin to redefine our reality and our own image and interest.
Did the discovery of the truth make you angry?
Of course it did. It made me angry that the European would lie so systematically, that he was such a small human. He needed to hoard all history. He understood that history and humanity are dialectically linked, that the more history, the greater grasp you have of your history, the greater grasp you have of your humanity. And what he wanted to do was to dehumanize us. So one way to do that, a sure way to do that, was to take away our history and make us, as Malcolm said, a non-historical being, i.e. a Negro.
Are you saying then that it's a tool of oppressing a people?
Oh, yes. The destruction of a people's history is one of the first acts against the people. To interrupt a person's history, as Cabral, the African revolutionary theorist, said, to interrupt the people's history, to appropriate it, is to at the same time appropriate their capacity for creating progress and contributing to the forward flow of overall human history. So what one does is loses one's identity of purpose and direction here, because all acts are historical acts. All acts toward establishing identity, purpose, and direction are historical acts. And one does not grasp one's history, one has a question about one's humanity. Therefore, when the black people could identify with nothing but Mississippi, Alabama, or Georgia, they assumed, like Topsy, they just sprang up. And they were glad to be anywhere other than the home of humanity and human civilization, i.e. Africa.
You have been studying the history of the Nile for some time, but I understand this is your first trip here. Is there any specific impact that eyeballing it is having on you?
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, in the final analysis, practice proves everything. And just to come back is a kind of spiritual experience, especially to come back with ASCAC that Jake and I had first founded along with other co-founders, to put together a project like this, to bring back home 1,000 people, is a spiritual experience in itself. And to see all these people interested in rescuing and reconstructing our classical African civilization is an upliftment for me. And it certainly would deepen my appreciation for the project ASCAC, the Association for Study of Classical African Civilization, is involved in.
At the conference, Dr. Karenga argued for a particular interpretation of ancient Egyptian culture and religion. But Dr. Ben differed strongly.
He wrote the Hosea, a book he called the Hosea, which he took from various ancient books, holy books, sacred books of the Nile. He rearranged and interpret as he see fit the sayings from these different books. He wanted me to endorse it. I let him know I can't endorse it if it was a book that you say to inform people, I could endorse it. But when you want this to be the canon book, the book.
What does that mean, like the Bible?
The Bible, the sacred book of the organization. And I felt that ASCAC should have no sacred book. People should be allowed to be Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, anything they want. But we should get information to them to let them know what all these things are about, where they came from and the source. That created a hard feelings between the brother because I refused to endorse the book. And the brother then started to insist that it be adopted as by ASCAP as the divine work. And I, who took an oath in in respect to the mysteries of here, those works, and studied here, it is impossible for me to consider a work that is nothing but extracts from the original with an interpretation by a man who considered that he got a divine a word from a goddess Ma'at, the goddess of, to do this and to make a work better than the things he copied. And change around, I can do that. Not in good conscience. And that's the alleged point of hostility. It's not a point of hostility. I don't differ with the brother on many other things. That is a particular thing. And I would differ with him if he was Jesus Christ or Muhammad or God or Jesus or Moses on that point.
Beyond the argument over interpretation of African history on the Nile was the issue of respect.
In my case, I didn't even mind about the respect, because I said respect aren't demanded, respect is earned. The vast majority of you, as you see yourself, the people show me that respect. It is, you see where it is, Gil? Since I'm not hung up in the doctor business, since I write in a vein for the masses, since I've been fighting that we not be addressed as doctor this and doctor that we address as brother and sister, so that all of us would have the same status, all of us would have the same camaraderie, and nobody will feel that because he's Dr. So-and-so, he have more input. They can't see that. Some of them feel, well, I work for this and I'm a scholar and all this kind of thing. You see, that had never been anything for me, because my father reminded me that most of the people that give out doctorate didn't have any. They didn't even have a degree. Degree started by a man who didn't have one.
He has a right to be resentful of people who come into the field and establish themselves as authority, who wasn't even born when he entered the field. That anger is justifiable.
Some in ASCAC saw it simply as the normal friction involved in the changing of the guard.
It is difficult to turn loose sometimes that stage that represented your flowering, and so that's the way I interpret what happened the other night.
Just that he does not like stepping down.
That's right. He wants to remain active, and I think he's just afraid that when he goes to this next step, there won't be anything for him to do. But I have always tried to assure him that my concept of eldership is that at that point, you are at your most valuable position for the community.
There's a certain degree of paternalism that develops over a field of knowledge that you have been the sole pioneer in for a very long time, and a sense that other ways and other people and other perspectives of doing that thing is suspect. I think that's a part of the stridence that comes along with age and pioneering and long-term commitment to that. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that there's a certain arrogance that goes along with youth, and an unwillingness to give proper respect to those who came with limitations, but sincerity nonetheless. And the inability to reconcile those forces, that is the stridency of age and pioneering spirit and the paternalism that goes along with that, with the kind of eager enthusiasm of the young scholar who is coming along doing that. And I think that the pain and the conflict that seemed to have been reflected in that presentation has to do with the conflict of those energies which are confronting each other. My sense is that that's an inevitable process. I think that happens within a family with parents versus their adolescent youth who are beginning to come into their own adulthood, and the need to do certain things that are rebellious often in doing that in terms of negating the power and the responsibility of the parents. I think there's some of that that's inevitable. And I think one of the things that I tried to identify in the presentation I gave last night is that conflict is not always bad. Pain is not always bad. It is in pain and in conflict that new birth often comes about. I think the problem is that when we use the conflict as a means of dismissing the struggle that's inevitable in terms of that whole growth process. And I think if we see it as growth, and I think if we work towards trying to reconcile the differences and to bring about the mutual respect, that is, Dr. Ben needs to have greater respect for the youth. I think that the youth need to have greater respect for the contribution that Dr. Ben made, given his time, given his situation.
The rift was apparently a serious one, and most who attended the ASCAC conference couldn't help but see it. And this caused a lot of confusion, because most of those who had come came because of their interest in Dr. Ben. And they assumed that this group of historians was an extension of Dr. Ben, which in a way is true. So, seeing Dr. Ben at odds with his own organization, ASCAC, was disconcerting to say the least.
We have these jerks, these fits, these starts, these conflicts as generations move together, and they're trying to move into their proper niches. We revere a Dr. Clark. We revere a Dr. Ben. And that's what our generation hopes to do. At the Great Lodge at Luxor, we hope to do the appropriate thing for them and to make our commitment with a new covenant to rebuild a new African consciousness among our people wherever we find them. And this is the greatest tribute we can make to them in respecting the work that they have done.
The dissension would carry over beyond this conference back to the United States. But for now, the pilgrimage would continue. There was a great deal to see, as you will see in a moment. Pilgrims would have three basic sources of information: from the lectures they had heard at the conference, lectures on site of the monuments, and lectures each evening.
You attended the conference 3 days. Some of you went to the temple at Philae yesterday, some this morning, and some in the afternoon. About the temple of Philae and what else you saw. When you land there, you probably land at Trajan's Spear. Trajan, the Roman emperor. What's significant about this temple? There are many things, but in particular. Number one, to me, is it the first time you're going to see a temple or part of a temple dedicated to the world's first known multi-genius. I am Hotep, or otherwise Imhotep. You see, in life-size sketch, single-line sketch, beginning the story of the first murder in human history ever recorded. Is going to deal with the murder of Osiris by his brother Set-Typhon. It's going to deal with the first known surrogate mother, goddess Het-Heru or Hathor, who is going to keep Isis's young son, the virgin-born Horus, born from a virgin and immaculate mother 4,100 years before Mary did the same thing. Now, you're going to see in this same temple, as you pass that wall, the big wall you see with that shape is called a pylon. That's what it's mean by the pylon. The outer wall with the door is the pylon. You pass through the first pylon, and you get into the second courtyard, but you quickly notice on your left-hand side, you are seeing two people throwing holy water over the Pharaoh. You are plumb in the presence of a baptism, but you were told that the first time a man baptized another one was when John the Baptist baptized Jesus. You found out that was a lie. Because you're seeing a baptism that took place before the birth of Jesus.
I came to Egypt in '82, convinced I was a very educated American woman. I went home and I completely re-educated myself. I found out that things I had learned in school were lies. They were not true. Omissions were made, impressions were given that did not exist.
Okay.
I'm returning now 5 years later, completely re-educated.
Hi. You've been miseducated. in the sense that we have not been told the complete story. We've been told from when we came on the slave ships and not before. So this is a great revelation and a great mental adjustment in that our minds are being freed in a sense. In a real sense, which is necessary.
Well, I've learned that for one, this is not a European country, and that all they said about Greeks is not true, that Africans really did have something to do with building the temples and the pyramids, and a lot of stuff here that I didn't know back in the U.S. at my school.
African history is totally left out of the educational system in America, in the Western world for that matter. That is why we have to establish independent black schools, such as the one that's in New Brunswick, New Jersey now, the Nile Institute. But it's unfortunate we as Africans do not support our own institutions, and that is a commitment we're going to have to get out of. We're going to have to start supporting our own institutions. We cannot expect other people who destroyed our history, denied us our history. We cannot expect them to also now turn around and support and give us money, finance our institution and re-educate us. The man that enslaved you is not going to educate you.
You are facing to that separate building on that side. They call it the first house. A custom was started in Egypt 1500 BC, when the first and only lady ruled Egypt as a male pharaoh, Queen Hatshepsut. That was in a glory time of Egypt. She built such a nice monuments along the valley of the Nile. She opened many of the gold mines. The trading expeditions to East Africa was recorded, her famous journey to Pont, and also with all of that, she ruled Egypt for 21 years. The temple was built in the West Bank. They call it El-Deir al-Bahari, or Queen Hatshepsut Temple, you'll see that. And she proved her right to the throne of Egypt in that way.
When you look at this island, and that everything had to be brought here, we're actually observing one of the great labor systems of the world. What kind of barge brought all of this equipment on this island, all this stone? So they had some intelligence in the use of weights and measures that we don't have today. They also had some intelligence in chiseling, in putting things in place that we don't seem to have today. Most of what you see is ashlar masonry, and that is building without cement. There's nothing holding this thing together except the proper placing of the weight on other weights in order to create balance. And the balance was the key to the life, to the society, to the building, to everything that existed in that society. Was a matter of balancing one thing. Most of the pyramids, there's no cement holding all that brick together. So they held together by balance, and they've been there 5,000 years. We can't do that today.
This temple, great temple of Isis, well known in the history, this was the last temple in Egypt. They worshipped to Isis till 396 AD. And after that time, it was converted as a Coptic church and a Coptic monastery. So this was the last Egyptian temple, last temple worshipped. They found on an island facing to the old location a cemetery for the priests. In the 4th century AD, for the Isis temples. Or the same way also, the name converted. May be like the native, the Egyptian name. They call it the Ptolemaics Phila, which means land of friendship, land of brotherly love. So that was, which is the name after that time. So the old name, this was the original island, and whole temples were all half a mile away from here, the elevation of the original island was much lower than this level of this island. In 1902, the British built the old dam on the bed of the first cataract of the Nile. And that was the purpose, to have about 1 million acres planted in the delta of the Nile with cotton and for that, in that time when the old dam being built, this area was converted as a reservoir area. Suddenly, the original island and the temples were flooded. The archaeologists and everybody interested in that monument, they worry that the temples being built with Nubian sandstone, the damaging was started in some places. For this reason, for the fact, with a big appearing from UNESCO, they saved the temples. It was quite an engineering feat. They built a huge coffer dam, 2 big sheets of metals around the original island. The divers, the Navy's divers, they went to the bed of the Nile, they cleared the silt, they took photographs for everything. Then inside the coffer dam, they start to build a great pumping line. They pump water from inside the coffer dam until it's converted at a dry place. In that time, an Italian contractors company was responsible to move the temples, stone by stone, 40,000 blocks of stone by stone. This project finished in 10th of March, 1980, as the last international cooperation to save the temples. So, as you see, it's one of the best preserved temples in all over Egypt, which is relocated.
This was the best recorded period in the history of the world. They wrote on everything. They wrote in the middle of a spoon. They wrote on the handle of a fork. They wrote on everything. Everything had an explanation as to why it came into being. They left it for all the world to see. There should never be any doubt as to who they were and what they did, because they left us a record, and signs and symbols and in their writing.
Till 800 years ago was in south of Aswan. That Nubian kingdoms were still the Nubian kings' names, a list known even for the late time. So that was a kind of, when the Romans came, they didn't start any kind of, they found it that it's hard to fight the Nubian kings. So they start to make some treaties with Nubians south of Aswan itself. This lower part of Nubia, or this part, was a kind of treaties. That's what the history books mention. Okay, this is Hathor temple. Hathor was a lady of joy, goddess of love, beauty, music, dancing. Now you see some of the simple musical instruments here. This is priest playing with a double flute. Another one having a harp here. And right here, sorry, this is May. He's Bess, god of pleasure. Pleasure, yes. He's dancing with his harp also. And this is our dancing baboon with electric guitar.
When Osiris is murdered by his brother, he's cut up into 14 pieces. His mother taking Anubis, the god of death, Anubis. They're going to find the body for the first time in Persia, where his brother had taken it to hide it. They reconstituted, and being God, he can come back again. He resurrected and came back. His brother again in his jealousy found him and killed him again. This time cut up into 14 pieces. His wife again and mother, Isis, went, found 13 of the 14 pieces. She could not find one because it was eaten by the Nile catfish. happened to be his phalanx, his penis. And thus Osiris was left without a penis. He was, as instead, unmanned. His wife, Isis, ordered that a sample, a symbol of his penis be built, many places to remind those who had killed him that they will never be able to rest. Wherever they go, they will see his penis. And so she ordered obelisk, and that's the source of the obelisk.
You are standing now on the well-known unfinished obelisk. This was supposed to be the biggest obelisk not over Egypt. The point is there, like the shape of pyramid, base is down there. The length of the obelisk, 137 foot long, and as one piece, 1,168 tons. No inscriptions here, but the archaeologists believe that it was cut in time of Hatshepsut. Queen Hatshepsut, she offered it in her universal to Amun-Ra in Karnak temple, Luxor. But during cutting, the obelisk was cracked. This small crack was quite a fault. Here, the stone was left in the same quarry for a long time, and one side is not free, but later on, they tried to cut smaller piece. But even a small part, they discovered the natural fault. So this is the reason why the stone was left here. One side is not free, as you see. And we know that many other obelisks were moved from here.
The tomb of Serinput II.
Who was he?
He was a noble. At that day, he was called a noble, people of nobility. Would be equivalent to Secretary of State.
The impact of the tombs and monuments had a counterpart in a highly emotional visit to the Nubian village of Dabu. Peopled by a people indistinguishable, save for manner of dress, from ourselves.
And of course, I can't forget this daughter I brought from New York. I almost forgot her. I'm not going to say much because there's nothing for me to say. I already feel what I feel. But your day is my day. It speaks for itself.
happy to see us. Now it was off to the northern part of the Nile Valley. The 800 Americans of African descent, including the historians from Azkak, would visit the Grand Temple of Luxor, the Temple of Karnak, the Valley of the Kings with the tomb of King Tut, and much more, as you'll see in the concluding hour of our series that we call Return to the Nile Valley. The journey of the 800 African-American pilgrims now moved northward, down the Nile. Now, that might sound confusing, but the fact is that the Nile is the only major river on Earth that flows to the north. So, down the Nile is to the north, up the Nile is to the south. We'd all be staying in 3 hotels in the city of Luxor. From here, we would visit the Valley of the Kings, the tomb of King Tut, and a number of magnificent temples, including one that is so huge it staggers the imagination and the naked eye. All this in this concluding chapter in our 3-part series that we call Return to the Nile Valley.
This temple was rebuilt during the Greek period, at what is called the Greek period, the Greek domination. Of course, the Greek didn't do the work. The indigenous people did the work, but the Greeks were in control. This temple is done during the time of Ptolemy the 12th, the father of Cleopatra the 7th. The Cleopatra that they're always talking about, her father, who changed his name from Ptolemy the 12th and called himself Nuus Dionysus, which means the new Osiris. And that's the period of this temple, but it's rebuilt on another existing temple. So you got to be careful. Most of the temples are rebuilt on other temples.
So what we have here is one of the recent temples. It's one of the temples that was built by the Greeks. It really is built on the same location as 2 earlier temples. So this spot is actually a very, very ancient spot for temples, even though what we have here are the ruins of the most recent ones of that process. And what we find throughout Egypt is that very often people will use ancient spots. They always come back to the same spot and build new temples on top of that. And that's what we have here at this location as well.
Dr. Ben, you know what my reaction is when I see this with my own eyes? Anger. I understand. My brother, I understand. You know, because I realize that I've been had.
Yeah, you have.
Did you feel the same way?
When I came?
Yeah.
I was choked up, frustrated. My anger was like yours, but it had gone to the point where I choked. Because I said, here, everything I've been told come from Judeo-Christianity, I found to have come long before there was anything called Judaism or Christianity. And these are replicas, yeah.
We've done it.
Yeah. And you see the imagery, and they try to deny this. That's what this is the tragedy of slavery. It is not so much the physical pain because they die. It is the mental pain that's left. And I think that the slave masters inherited, the ones who inherit from the masters can never pay.
These are the radiation lines of the sun that come out dealing with the heavens and the ball that's at her womb. She's a goddess that deals with birth, and so it's quite natural to think about the quickening that goes directly from the head area down into the womb. So it's like 2 areas that become so very important, the head itself and then the pelvic region. And we will find that those are the same kinds of glyphs that we do find with the Dogon people when they talk about the balance between earth and sky. And it's a kind of balance between the head region and the pelvic region, saying that we have a kind of a double of every person, one that dwells in the heavens or could dwell in the trees or in the sky or in trees of ground, etc. But anyway, you have a double in nature, and that becomes like your idealized type or your idealized self.
Egyptian guides were also on hand to lecture the large group.
They took our civilization, Greek civilization and Romans. That's real Egyptian. That's Egyptian, really.
Just as Dr. Ben said, as well as John Henrik Clark, these pillars are perfectly and symmetrically aligned, and they have been put together without a single piece of mortar. Dr. Ben, how did they actually do this work?
In some cases like that, they chisel it into the wall, the stone itself. They bring the solid stone, a block, and then they cut the block around, and then they chop in. But as you could notice, in this case, they put on the plaster, let it dry, and not completely, and then they took a pattern and they put it on and they carve out what is damp.
So this is not solid rock.
There are two types.
Plaster over rock.
This is plaster, but on that, you got two types. Notice there are two types.
So he dug into that
one dug in, and this is plaster.
You know, I was noticing that up in the ceiling, there are holes.
Oh, yeah. For the hinges, okay, there were cedar doors. Big, solid cedar doors.
Oh,
in two halves.
And this was all colors. Because I see some of the ceilings.
Yeah.
They were all color, beautiful colors.
My brother, this is called Hippo-style hall.
In each entrance, you could see the snake, and sometimes snake with a crown of Upper Egypt and double crown of Egypt or upper that's with lotus flower behind it. This is in any section. When you go, yeah, if you go behind on the entrance of the temple, in the back, just behind the wall, the back door itself, you see that on two sides.
That's the Caduza.
Yes,
the modern day symbol.
The modern day, yes.
It came from here?
It came from here, yes. Yes.
Oh, right. So you mean the white people were not the ones who invented all this medicine? Like
no, don't believe that.
Here you have the baptism or purification of the Pharaoh. The god Tahuti or Tut, the god of the scribes, along with God Horus, baptizing the Pharaoh, Ptolemy 12. The baptism is done with holy water. The water is symbolized by the Ankh and also the Was, W-A-S. The Was is the greatest symbol. Here is a Was. This is a Was. This staff with what appeared to be a goat head. And here is an Ankh. They took the Ankh and the Was, joining them together intermittently, and created the water. And thus you have Ankh was all the way. This is the purification rite, because the Pharaoh cannot be installed, coronated, without being purified. The removal of all his wrongdoing, because since he's going to be the Pharaoh and he's going to represent the people with the admonitions of Ma'at, I have not done any wrong. I have not committed murder. I have not robbed. I have not speaking with an ill tongue, to make sure he has to be purified, like Jesus was purified.
And those are the urns that are pouring out the water?
Pouring out the water, both sides. Then the next scene, after purification, now Ptolemy the 12th is coronated with the crown of the north and the crown of the south, the crown of two lands. We know it is so because here is God happy. Symbolically, of course, the God happy. And look at the good word. We know it is the God of two lands because he represents both men and women. The breast of a woman and the penis of the man, the penis held in a penis container, penis cup, like a jackstrap. God happy represented with the lotus flower and the papyrus plant. And here you have Isis following below. How we know it's Isis? By the chair at the crown, so that we know that these different gods. And everybody carrying the ankh. Good life and unification with ancestors in the new world. The Africans put symbols of animals and birds to represent certain qualities in the deity. A falcon flies fast, high, and is strong, right? God is fast, strong, wise, and reliable. Therefore, the falcon. The lion is strong. The lion will rip you apart, represent the strength of the Pharaoh. So they use a lion. You get what I'm saying? The crane with his long bill symbolizes writing, a quill pen. He is the represented, the scribe, because you use quill to write, and they use quill to write. So why not use the crane to represent the god of scribes?
As we move from one site to another by day, Dr. Ben's lectures by night help keep our perspective.
We go to Edfu, the temple of God Horus. There you will notice that there have been a number of temples over a number of years been built there, one on top of the other. You will notice that they even took one temple and used those stones, our old temple of Hatshepsut, that's going back to 1550, before the Christian era, and used it for paving the courtyard. But you will also see where the Greeks copied the colonnade architecture. You will see in there the great green marble statue symbolic of God Horus, represented as a falcon. We're in the crown of the north and the south, the two lands. In there you will see surveying instruments, mathematics for surveying, mathematics and the layout of that temple, showing you the ways the old ancient Egyptian figured things. Measuring tools, a Nile meter. They didn't guess when they go by high tide and low tide. They didn't guess when there would be a flood. They could tell by a meter they had made. In there you will see where the copy, where the idea for the Jews talk about the Ark of the Covenant. You will see where they copied it.
This is a facsimile of the Ark boat. The Ark of the Covenant is a copy of this. The original is taken and carried to the Cairo Museum. And this has placed here for the public.
Oh, this is such a revelation, such a profound feeling. We've been told, of course, by Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and all our elders that we can trace our medical history and healing art back to, of course, our ancestors in Nubia and Kemet. And to come here and see the actual documentation that our ancestors left for us it's a profound and wonderful feeling. It is.
And you ask why I'm mad in the United States every day. I've been mad for 1939. And going to stay that way until Nubia and the rest of the whole 11.3 million square miles get back in our hands. In front, the grand temple of them all. If you take St. John the Divine and St. Patrick, take the Vatican. and St. Peter's Basilica and the square added together, and you could put it in one corner in the temple I'm talking about. This is the temple at Warit, W-A-R-I-T, now called Karnak. This temple has temples within the temple. This temple has its own lake. This temple is 1.5 miles long, by half mile wide. You can't walk the temple and check everything. This temple has hypostyle hall, a hall of columns. Columns 50 feet tall. Take 6 of the tallest men here, holding finger to finger, can't stand it. Each column, not a matter, no mortar, all cut stone. You can't take a sheet of paper and push between the joints. And you tell me we are an oral people. We don't write. What the hell kind of already talking? It's mathematics, it's plans that build this temple. This is the temple that you're going to find most of the obelisks all over the world, especially in Rome, where they now put cross on top of them, came from. The one in Central Park called Cleopatra's Needle, they had nothing to do with Cleopatra. That's the obelisk of Thutmose IV. It is in here, in this temple, you will see God mimicked in his royalty. In this temple, you will see the obelisk of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. It is in this temple, a few young people in this audience will be in the whole group married. You have come before this gathering stating that you wish to be joined together. In the tradition, we do not join two people. It is not the custom anywhere in the continent of Africa to join two people. We join two families, two villages, two waters.
Land is spiritual. The human family is spiritual. The birds and bees are part of a spiritual continuity. All of it had to harmonize. So the Africans created the concept of Ma'at, M-A-A-T, that there is a harmonious cosmic force in the universe that everyone seeks to arrive at. And it's a spiritual dimension of life. That's why these great things were built. If you look at the pyramids only in terms of its technical dimension, you miss the enormity of it. If you look at the Temple of Karnak, which was generation after generation building to their God concept, the greatest temple complex in the history of the world, you miss what the Africans were all about. If you walk the mile-long sphinx that linked the great temple complex at Karnak with the great lodge at Luxor, the temple at Luxor, that was the great university centers of the world, where there were tens of thousands of people learning how you move from a low level of consciousness to the highest level of godliness within your human context. The arts, the healing arts, the scientific arts, the arts of studying the universe, music and whatnot was taught in the Great Lodge. It is the granddaddy and grandmama of the Masonic order, of the Rosicrucians. It is the prototype of the Temple of Solomon. It was built and enlarged 500 years before Solomon. This pillared temple along the Nile was the model that inspired the Greeks to build the Parthenon.
This is the Temple of Karnak. It is in reference, that is in tribute to the god Amun-Ra, a god of Wad, or the Greek name Thebes. There are many points to the god Amun. One concept has to do with it. He represents the emanation of that god force that is hidden. Some would make reference to that as being the statement of the access to the higher levels of awareness, and those parts of ourselves that remain hidden, but indeed can be made visible with proper work. And so that is a very, very important concept. Many falsely portray the priesthood of Amun as in later years becoming a very difficult group to work with. But the key thing to be raised, it was from the same place, Wa'at, that African people later did reclaim the entire of their country after an earlier invasion of so-called Hyksos people. And it came from this place that we also have now Fawad, that there was a resurgence. And the African people did emerge from this place and then did retake all of Egypt, and Egypt went on to have a tremendous, Egypt did have a tremendous renaissance, a very vast degree.
Here we are at the temple. It's called the Temple of the Grand Lodge here in Luxor, the Temple of Ammon. And the interesting thing about this particular temple is that it demonstrates in a fairly significant way one of the things that you see consistently throughout all of the temples, and that is that these places, for whatever reasons they happen to be, are actually spiritual centers. That is the main vestibule? That's the main vestibule. That's the Sphinx, which is the front of the temple itself. That's the entrance into the temple.
And then you'd walk through these columns until you get progressively closer to the Holy of Holies.
To the Holy of Holies. And one of the interesting things about this temple, too, is the tremendous length of it. It's a tremendously long temple, and it's probably one of, I guess, next to Karnak, it's probably one of the larger ones, of course, in its original form. And in fact, in years gone by, of course, the two temples, this Luxor and Karnak, were actually connected by the Avenue of the Sphinx. The Karnak temple is about 2.5 miles down the road there, and in the ancient times, the two temples were actually connected by this fantastic Avenue of the Sphinx. So I'm sure that in the days of its glory, it was probably one of the most magnificent structures you could ever imagine. Where all people would come. Mm-hmm. All people would come outside and would gather in front of the temple. So there's usually a huge courtyard in front of the temple itself. As you move from the courtyard, there is a kind of a vestibule, an opening into the main part. So some of the special people of the religious people would come into the first opening of the temple. Then eventually, the actually accommodation for people becomes more and more narrow as you move back until you get to the Holy of the Holiest, and no one went there except the priests themselves. The priests who had gone through years of personal preparation, purification, and understanding of where they were and what they were doing, and that was a restricted area. And no one came there unless it was the priests or the pharaohs or the kings themselves in terms of a place of worship and sacrifice and ceremonies which occurred there. So the priests would execute the ceremonies, the people would get messages or indications of it from the outside and would vicariously participate from their presence outside.
So the grassroots knew what was going on inside, even though they couldn't physically be there.
Yes, and very often, for example, when they had the grand ceremonies, I'm sure all the people from thousands of miles around, hundreds of miles around at least, would come and would be outside, particularly along the Avenue of the Sphinx. But they would not be inside where the ceremonies and the main sacrifices and ceremonies were taking place. Those were never seen. Those were seen only by the grand masters of the lodge or the high priest of the temple itself.
When was this temple built, and was it built by the Egyptian, the African, for themselves, or was this under the Greek rule?
Okay, I don't know the exact dates, but this is the temple that was built by the Egyptians themselves. Mm-hmm. It was built by the Egyptians themselves.
Not at the behest of anybody else.
No. And one of the differences, of course, in this temple and many of the other ones that are much better preserved is the fact that this is one of the original temple structures itself. It goes back to the Egyptian era itself. It has nothing to do with the Greeks, nothing to do with the Romans. This is the model temple itself as it was built by the original African people. It wasn't just a church. You see, it isn't just a church. They were places for learning. They were places for instruction. They were places for study. They were universities. For example, Karnak, which is the temple we cannot see from here, but is the one that's connected with this one. Karnak was the University of Apet-Asat, which was, in fact, one of the largest universities. In fact, I understand at one point there were almost 80,000 students who were studying there at that particular university. 80,000 students.
At one time?
At one time. At one time. And so all of the temples were places of instruction. And see, that's the difference. In a society which integrates the spiritual and the secular, where there is no separation in church and state, where science is not separate from religion, then, of course, then there's always an ongoing process. So they didn't just meet here on holy days. and have a good time and wave the incense and then all go home and have Sunday dinner. It isn't the whole concept of the churches that we have, but these were places which were centers of learning, they were centers of instruction, they were centers of research. That's the other significant thing. They did research here in the sense that in some of the places we've seen observatories, we've seen hospitals within the temple itself. So there were many, many uses that were made of temples which go far beyond the idea of a church.
Why did such a people with such mastery, with such sensitivity, why would such a culture and a civilization die?
All we can do is really speculate, but it's a speculation, I think, that's really very critical, because I think that what we can learn by whatever led to that are the things that kill civilizations, even in their greatness. And I think there are certain kinds of indicators. One of the things that we can certainly look at is that there was a decline in the society whenever there was an invasion from the outside. That is, the infiltration of other kinds of elements that begin to diffuse the richness and the centrality of the culture itself. That somehow, as long as the culture, and I don't mean a reliance on inbreeding, and I don't mean that outsiders coming in is necessarily destructive. I think that when outside influences begin to destroy the substance and the essence of the culture, then you begin to suffer the consequences of that. And as the Greeks, as the Romans, as the Hyksos, that is, the Asian Arabs, begin to come in, there were diffusions within the culture. There were resurgences in the Egyptian culture, the Kemetic culture. That is, the culture regained its strength at points when those invaders were able to be thrown out.
The significance of Abydos is that, by all fairness, this was our Jerusalem, and it existed over 3,000 years before Jerusalem, and it is still in basically its original form. It was a spiritual city. It was here at Abydos where the mummification process took place, for the weighing of the heart to decide whether the person has lived a life worthy enough for the person to enter paradise, the hereafter. This was years before the Christians invented a concept called heaven and hell. More important is that in its structure and in its design, it is still in its original form. All the records, the drone records, carved records of the other pharaohs, Greek pharaohs, all here at Abydos. And another thing, when you look at the building, you look at each column has writing on it. Each wall has writing on it. This was before electricity, before the flashlight. How could anyone see that well? Those fine details that you see. Again, this was the best recorded age in the history of the world. So Abydos is truly the holy city of the African people all over the world.
You walk in the temple, you see this vast complex. You look to the right and you see buildings, ruined buildings with Roman arch, with Gothic arch. How the hell are going to be Roman arch and Gothic arch? There's no Rome yet. There's no Greece yet. Greece doesn't come into existence until 833 when Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Rome doesn't come into existence with the Etruscans, and that is at best 1000 BC. And Ramesses died in 1200 and at BC.
This is considered to be the place where the head of Osiris was buried, or his, if you will, a statement of his consciousness, and that it does indeed relate to a understanding of blackness in its full detail in the different phases of life.
What has been unfolding in your eye is the original story that you heard as Jehovah, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. But it's in its proper name is Ra, taking the place of what Jehovah took. Osiris, taking the place of what this imaginary angel had, and Isis taking the place of what Mary took. But when you finally get to Abydos, you will find that there is actually an angel equally as the angel that's supposed to bring the sperm and place it into Mary. You will see a half taking the sperm from Osiris and placing it into a set to cause the Immaculate Conception.
En route to the Valley of the Kings, the colossal statues of the pharaoh Amenhotep III and his queen Tai. Awesome in their proportions, made of sandstone. The Valley of the Kings lay just beyond. Perhaps the most sensational tomb in this valley is the tomb of a king who died in his youth. Lycidas did a documentary on him back in 1978.
This is the Valley of the Kings. This valley had already given up a great store of tombs of Egyptian rulers. Archaeologists explored and dug up the length and breadth of this Egyptian valley until November 4th, 1922, when workers uncovered a single step that led downward. So down they dug until they found a door behind which lay the long-sought tomb of Tutankhamun. Behind that door was a room that was filled with artifacts and relics that had been placed there when the young king had been buried. One by one, painstakingly so, these artifacts were brought up the stairs into the sunlight for the first time in over 3,000 years. It would take several months to label and categorize and then pack away each priceless piece, several of which are now here in New York to be seen. It was a sensational find. However, not many of the people were aware that these pieces had been created for a tomb, not to be seen. What kind of artist would create such an exquisite work for no one to see?
King Tut came out of the end of the 18th dynasty. And he is fortunate in that the grave robbers who literally went over Africa, taking everything in sight, did not find his grave. He was a minor king who had a major funeral. Now, he is well known for what they found in his tomb. If they found all this grandeur in the tomb of a teenage minor king, let us think what they could have found had the other tombs been intact. The Africans literally pioneered in elaborate funerals. And African people today, throughout the entire world, still bury elaborately, go in depth to, as we say, put them away nicely. They put them away nicely in ancient Egypt.
We're talking about a man who lived during the 18th dynastic period. A dynasty is a period of rule. It could be a family or it could be one person. We're talking about an individual who, for the most part, did very little within the 2 years that he lived as Pharaoh of Egypt. The word Pharaoh means king or head of state. Why? Tutankhamun took the throne at age 17 and died at age 19. It's bad enough that he would have been a teenager ruling the greatest country in the world at that time, the most powerful. But he was an invalid besides being a teenager. Then you ask, then why was he on the throne? Because
it was his time to rule, having been adopted by one of the most noted pharaohs of all Egyptian history. Not only noted from the Egyptian point of view, but noted from even the Judeo-Christian Islamic point of view, because it was Amenhotep, otherwise known as Akhenaten, who gave to the world the concept of the one and only God, otherwise called monotheism. Akhenaten died 43 years before the birth of another African named Moses, which you will find in the book of Exodus.
His mother-in-law was the beautiful and great Queen Nefertiti, and his grandmother was the great Queen Tai. He came out of one of the most responsible and one of the greatest royal families ever to sit on any throne of any country at any time in the history of the world.
This is 18th dynasty. That's important because that is clearly a native dynasty, and as I've indicated in other places, it had its origin with Second Enre, a king who came from the south and started this 18th dynasty, and within that 18th dynasty, the daughter of Tutmosis II was Hatshepsut. This is her mortuary temple. So this temple here is a copy of that temple over there, except it's on a much larger scale. Now let me say something special about Hatshepsut's temple here. Hatshepsut had an expedition that left Kemet and went all the way to Somaliland. And that is pictured, this expedition is pictured over here on the wall of a part of that temple, showing the king of Punt, the queen of Punt, and so forth. But what's more important than that is that Hatshepsut indicated that what she was trying to do here was to build a Kemet in Punt. To build a Punt in Kemet. Now that's a very powerful statement, and she not only made the statement, but she went far enough to do that. That means that she regarded the ancestors of the Kemites to be the people from Somaliland. So she was going back to the ancestral home to pick up relics, to pick up perfume, incense, to pick up plants, and then she actually brought all of those things here to this temple, and her attempt was to reproduce the southern images of Somaliland in Kemet. And so at one point you actually had trees growing in this valley because dirt, plants, and other things had actually been transported and transplanted in the valley here. But I think that is important because it clearly, with the Queen's own indication, links Africans of the center of the continent with Africans of the northern part of the continent.
Inevitably, it was time to return to the United States. For many, it would take some time to sort out the reactions to all that had been seen and experienced, but all agreed that it had been overwhelming, especially because the educational experience for most of us never associated this kind of achievement with Africa.
We have come back from a 400-year bondage, and now we're back home, 9,000 miles home, and it shows the coming forth by day that we're coming home, we're here, and we got to take it back.
Egypt is just something too beautiful for words. I've come home, and I think the conference, one of the beautiful things about the conference is the range of ages, especially the children. I have a nephew who will be 3 this month who's named after the Nile River. His name is Nile, and I would like to think that one day he'll be able to be here and understand the significance of the name that he carries. It's coming home.
How do we get on with the process? Because I truthfully believe that we are part and we're supposed to be here. So what's the next step? What's the organizing process, and how do we get on?
I feel comfortable. Feels like it's home. It's a real spiritual thing to see the ruins, to see Ramesses II. Our son's name is Ramesses, and it was great seeing that. I'm going to bring my son here so he can see him.
Other than the heat and Arabs and Cairo, it's great.
The architecture alone was enough to numb the senses. Even more important, we learned that the architecture, awesome as it is, was not the sum and substance of what these monuments, temples, and tombs were about.
Coming out of this sun and this valley that harmonized and reflected the beneficence of God, the Africans created a tribute to God, and that's what all this represents. And it definitely does not reflect the value system of the North or the Europeans or the value system of the Sand people, many of whom come out of the Arab culture, because the Africans balanced things out. The male and female principle were balanced. That's why you see a temple to the male principle, a temple to the female principle together. They put the female at the center of their spiritual value system. Other cultures of the North put the male at the center, and they dismiss the female, and the Sand people do the same thing. So these monuments, when you look at the values that they represent, could not have been done by people who come from the northern cradle, because they do not reflect that male dominance. They reflect the harmony between the male principle and the female principle, which is what the Africans have always built their culture around.
In addition to the historians, the group had also been fortunate in being exposed to the many well-respected men and women with expertise in other fields, who gave additional context to the implications of this trip.
When I came, I was hoping for an opportunity to think through the possibilities of an additional channel of motivation for children of color in terms of the educational experience. And coming here has confirmed that even more, that we have to get away from the notion of at risk and compensation and disadvantaged and all of those negatives, and look for a kind of modality that will open the richness of antiquity to our children, the strength of the power of their people, the beauty of this land, the temples and the tombs. I think that this is a dimension that we haven't looked at, and we must. And I'm not thinking in terms only of children that we call middle class because their parents have the money to finance this kind of a trip, or even a child that we might consider gifted or very bright in the Eurocentric notion of what that is. But I'm talking about the large numbers of our disaffected, disconnected adolescents in the mainstream of our urban cities who can attach themselves to nothing that is positive. I think here is a natural healing for them that we have not considered, and we must. And in that way, I will make efforts to connect with others who have had this experience and to see if it's possible to get our legislators, particularly the Black and Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus, to initiate programs of education with funding that will give us this added dimension for our youngsters.
One of the reasons that I'm here and my whole interest in Egyptology, my interest in African history, is predicated on my presumption that the one thing that immobilizes us and incapacitates us in terms of us being able to use our energies in the kind of self-preservative ways that other people do is this lack of information from youth as well as old, at all ages in our communities.
All right,
so it's a profound impact.
Well, now, I'm kind of slow. You got to break that down for me. Now, how specifically does that work?
Okay.
Knowledge of what went down here centuries ago. How is that going to affect my behavior?
Okay, very simple. One of the things that happens in schools almost from day one is that they begin to tell people who've come from Europe how great they are as a people, how important they are as a people, that they are part of a lineage that came out of the greatness of Rome, the greatness of Greece, the greatness of the Napoleonic era, the greatness of Alexander. Those pictures, those illustrations, those stories, those historical documents, those examinations, those museums, all of those are ways of elevating people's respect for themselves. It says, you are a worthwhile person, and you can do what has been done. And that whole sense of continuity between today, 1987, and 1887, and 1287, and 1087 AD and BC, all of those are ways that people in other cultures have of communicating to their young people and to each other that we are worthwhile and we have energies that can be used. My argument is that we are liking that, And by liking that, we are not able to understand the resources that are available within us by virtue of what we've done as a people. In other words, if you tell people you've never been anything but a slave, you've never been anything but a ghetto dweller, you've never been anything but a failure, you've never been anything but at the bottom rungs of society, then the inevitable result is that that's all I'm capable of doing. And my argument is that if people begin to know that they were kings and rulers and builders of knowledge and builders of world civilization, that in and of itself begins to communicate to young people and older people that if I've done it before, I can do it again.
Now, what about that dissension between Dr. Ben and some members of ASCAC? Well, it has continued and has led to Dr. Ben resigning from the organization. And some feel that this plays right into the hands of outside interests who view ASCAC as a threat and want to see it fail.
Every good organization that African people form, any place in the world, is in danger, because the one thing our enemies do not want us to ever understand is the nature of power. And they will send other blacks into the organization to destroy it. And these blacks will be very convincing pretenders of support for the organization, but they will be paid agents of our enemies.
I think that there is a very genuine effort on the part of certain people who understand the significance of this event to undermine it and to sabotage it. I believe that that's very true.
Over and above the internal problems of ASCAC, the monuments along the Nile still stand, patiently waiting for all to come and see the story that they themselves inscribed. But for one important member of this journey, seeing all of this is no longer promised.
Do you think you're going to be coming over here many more times?
Well, depending on the health and strength, and that means the part of my eyesight holds up, and my health is holding pretty well. I didn't expect the glaucoma. It came at a critical time in my life. It hit me hard, and I became a little depressed about it, because reading has been a way of life for me. I'm self-educated, so you have to understand what that means. I haven't completely reconciled the fact that I cannot even read footnotes without a magnifier. And I cannot recognize the fact that had I known, paid more attention to diet and health, it could have been avoided. But I was rushing, doing so many different things, mostly for other people, that I neglected my own health. And the people that I neglected it for have very little appreciation for the fact that I didn't do this for myself. I did all of it for other people.
I know.
And yet, with his eyesight weak, Professor John Henrik Clarke's visionary words at the ASCAC conference perhaps is this journey's best summation.
African people have always been the prize of foreigners and still are. African people have been under siege for more than 3,000 years and still are. Mainly because you have had great riches. Riches in culture, riches in imagination, material riches, and great spiritual riches. You have always had and still have something other people want, think they can't do without, and don't want to pay for. Every conqueror in Africa first came in as a dinner guest, because the Africans are hospitable to strangers. The Africans had not dealt with people who can come in your house, eat your food, rape your wife, and enslave the whole. The mentality majority of the Africans hadn't adjusted to the ice people of Europe and the sand people of Western Asia. And to this day, he hasn't adjusted. And first on our agenda is to get back our sense of being a historical people and stop answering to the word minority. With our total effort in learning history, which means nothing if all you're going to do is recite dates and personalities. You must understand the philosophical meaning, the political meaning, and the cultural meaning of history. And when you look at all these great states, how they were structured and how they were ruled, you need to say to yourself and your children, if I did it once, I'll do it again.
I'm